do that again. Right, sorry. Thank you, Pablo. Joining me tonight, I am very lucky to have with me a director, producer and writer of many items out there within the horror world. Notably, currently, there is Catchers, which is out on Audible for all subscribers. Also, Video Palace, a great podcast that was available on Shudder and still out there now for your listening pleasure. Many of you may be familiar with the name, connected to a certain movie known as the Blair Witch Project, as well as a few other items connected around there. But enough of the detail. With me right now is Ben Rock. Thank you very much for joining me. Hello, Ben.
Hello, Pablo. Thank you for having me on.
Yes, sorry for my rambling intro there.
All good.
But yes, as I say, you are mainly here with us to talk about Catchers, the new podcast series that's available on Audible right now. But to be honest, for my own interest, I was always a fan of Video Palace and a big promoter of Video Palace, which is a Shudder production. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, was the first audio production that Shudder put out as a podcast. Was it also the first general Shudder production, or was it just as a podcast, the first work that Shudder put out there?
I'm sorry, was it for the first Shudder original? Oh, that's a good question. No, it wasn't, because they had done The Core and they had done Dead Wax. I know at least those two things had been done before. Dead Wax, made by the amazing Graham Resnick, definitely worth checking out. While Shudder still exists. It's been a bad week over at Shudder. But it was their first audio production, and it was just a whirlwind experience. You know, we got the call about was I available to possibly do this thing in like April, and we started doing it in earnest in June, and the finals were like given to them in September.
Oh, right. And so that was with Video Palace specifically, was that?
Yeah. It was the fastest turnaround. It was a great experience, though. And I got to work with, just some amazing talent. It was created by Mike Manello and Nick Braccia, and they brought me on to co-write and direct it. I brought on Bob DeRosa, who I work with constantly, and he and I co-wrote it, and a producer named Liam Finn. We got an amazing cast, including Chase Williamson, who people will know maybe from John Dies at the End, one of my favorites, and Devin Siddell and Larry Cedar, just kick-ass cast. And it was whirlwind. Catchers was kind of very, very different because Audible moves deliberately. So it was a normal to long development process, and then recording and stuff like that took a while. But we got to like really plan our moves on Catchers, whereas on Video Palace it was very much flying by the seat of our pants.
Yeah, with Video Palace, was it as much a kind of writing and directing, or I know obviously a lot of it was created, as you say, by other people. Now with Catchers, as it is, that seems to be more a kind of the majority of which is your work. Did you conceive that yourself as well as directing and writing it? Or?
Yeah. Well, and with Video Palace, Mike and Nick had created a document that was kind of a loose outline, and Bob and I wrote the script kind of following that outline, but also elaborating on it. With Mike and Nick, they were executive producers on the project. So, but like Bob and I had very much written that. Catchers was an original idea. Bob and I were approached by Audible after Video Palace came out, and they were asking if we had any other ideas for audio stuff. And we put together kind of a document. We went through, everybody has like a folder on their computer of like the creative ideas that they've been kicking around, can't find the right home for. And Catchers was one of those for me. It was an idea I'd had some time ago, based very, very loosely on a real incident that happened, inspired, I should say, by a real thing that happened with an interaction with a dog catcher here in Los Angeles. And it just had been kind of kicking around. I pitched it to Bob. He liked it. And, it's every bit as much Bob's as it is mine at this point. But he and I pitched it together. We gave him like 4 or 5 ideas. That was one of the ones that they really liked. They had us, kind of develop it a little bit further. And it's their development process over at Audible. So they had us like write a pilot basically and give them a series Bible. Then they approved that. And then, we were off to the races. And it was, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun, but it was like, very it was just like one baby step at a time to get it done, whereas Video Palace, like the day they asked us to do it, they wished that they could have it like 2 weeks later. They already wanted it out.
So you're kind of working to a under the crack of the whip with Video Palace, which in some ways was probably a benefit, but you had a bit more time with
Well, and it became a pandemic project. We started writing it like we kind of got the go ahead to start writing it, and we were writing it when the pandemic hit. And so, like nobody knew what was going to happen as a result of the pandemic, but it was something, like we were already working on a project when it happened, and we were working in person, co-writing, and we just immediately switched to Zoom and kept on going.
Yeah, and I suppose that's one of the benefits of audio production over, say, like a TV or movie production when COVID hit. Is you just have to slightly readjust, but ultimately probably wouldn't have made a massive change to how you'd have probably done it pre.
Well, I mean, Video Palace, we had every actor in the same room if they were in the room. In the scene, we had them interacting with each other, and on video. So that was how we did Video Palace. On Catchers, because of COVID, we were able to have them often on simultaneous Zoom sessions, but none of them were in the same room ever. And in fact, I've never been in the same room with any of the cast, except for Billy Gardell, who plays Collins, because he's a friend of mine. But I haven't met any of the rest of the cast in person, nor have I met really any of our executives. Bob and I met with our main executive at Audible after the thing was recorded at like an outdoor cafe. I mean, I prefer, if possible, to have actors interacting off of each other. And, as opposed to, there is a school of thought in recording audio drama where you just bring in each actor by themselves and have them do all their lines alone or with a reader, but not their co-star. And, I feel like, especially in something like Catchers, where you have people bickering, like people really getting into it with one another. I want, it might be explicit in the script, but like an actor might escalate earlier or have a weird instinct or throw in a different line or ad lib something, and you want the other actor to be able to react to it in real time. And it, to me, it makes for better drama. So, like most of the really important stuff in Catchers, we did have actors, even though, again, they weren't in the same room, but usually on a Zoom session, so they could see each other, they could hear each other, they could react off of each other. And also, because of COVID, we weren't allowed into the studios at all. So we were on Zoom watching them. But because of COVID, every recording studio that we certainly encountered, they have a Zoom setup. They pipe out, the audio right out of the board, so you get clean audio. And, it's the next best thing to being in the room with them. I'd rather be in the room with them if I could, but, didn't have that luxury this time around.
No, well, certainly. And one thing that I'll say is, obviously, even though the production is slightly different due to a situation is completely out of all of our controls, the one thing that I noticed is similar between Video Palace and Catchers is just the Foley work and the kind of attention to the kind of additional sounds beyond the kind of spoken roles. Now, I'm always interested to find out with this, because obviously in the UK we've got kind of like a long history of radio dramas and the like, and
y'all are the gold standard. No one does it better than you guys.
Oh well, I'll take on that compliment as a nation here. But yeah, I mean with all the kind of Foley work that's done and the like, how does that work in regards to a podcast or when you're recording either Catchers or Video Palace? Do you use any kind of like traditional Foley work, or is it sound files, or do you use the real items? How is it you come and get that kind of background noise or kind of additional ambiance, so to speak?
Video Palace, we had a lot more like Foley. The sound designer, and that was a guy named Jeremy Lee, and he did a lot of Foley. If we didn't have the sound effect, he would just go out and record it. On Catchers, much of the sound work was done by a team out of Nashville, and I was communicating with them on the regular, but I'm pretty sure they were mostly drawing from sound effects libraries that they had. In rare events they might have busted out a mic and recorded something original, but there's a trick to like using pre-recorded footsteps and stuff like that to kind of make them not sound repetitive. Like in Video Palace, I even did some of the recording of the sounds. Like towards the end, there's a scene where there's a bunch of people beating on the windshield of a car, and that's I sat in my car and my wife beat on the windshield, and we got a bunch of different sounds of that and gave that all to Jeremy to work with. I would have liked to have been a lot more hands-on in Catchers, but because of the distance of where they were and COVID and other factors, I was very hands-on in giving them notes and giving them feedback on stuff, but I wasn't like there to do. I like getting my hands dirty with stuff like that. I did work a lot with a guy, Fred Tatasciore, who did the sound. He made all the monster sounds. I worked really closely with him, so that was an interesting experience as well, kind of coming up with how a creature would sound and kind of working with him to get there, because it was just a creative process like anything else, and Fred's a freaking amazing voice actor, so it was like just trying to figure out how to get what we needed.
All right, so no real kind of mutated animals or having to be caught and
no
squeezed at appropriate times.
No. I mean, I the sound designers might have thrown some other animal sounds in there, but like before we did it, before like when we cast Fred, before we even recorded him, I asked him if he could just sort of give me a rough sort of, I called it a monster kit, like give me the basic ideas so I could bring them into Adobe Audition, not Pro Tools like the fancy guys, but I use Adobe Audition, and just kind of mess around with them. So I put in some of our actual music from Steve Moore, who is our composer. I put in like a bed of crickets or woods or whatever, and just kind of played around with it so that when we were recording him, I would know like what were the pieces that we would need to get. And also I was able to give that file to the sound designer so they could at least have an idea of what I had in mind when I was recording it with him.
Oh, great. And obviously, I know we have talked about it, and I have mentioned it in a bit more detail before speaking to you, just trying to work my brain around the past recording to future comment, but I have covered that. Make a note for myself for future. But would you be able to give like a brief kind of synopsis to both Video Palace and Catchers, just for those who aren't familiar already?
Oh yeah. So Video Palace is kind of a first-person investigation, like a real podcast, like Serial or In the Dark, or a lot of these kinds of first-person things being presented by the narrator of a guy who's a VHS collector, and he gets this mysterious white tape and plays it, and there's like static and weird sounds on it, and he starts speaking in a language that doesn't exist in his sleep. And his girlfriend starts recording it, and he goes into the mystery of where the white tapes came from, which sucks him into a deep, dark Lovecraftian hole. But every episode is as presented by him, or most of the episodes are as presented by him. And it's either him or his girlfriend going out and doing interviews and kind of tracking down all the stuff. Meanwhile, they're kind of dogged by a what might be a paranormal force that is known as the Eyeless Man, that kind of crops up in Video Palace lore. from time to time. So that's Video Palace. Stars Chase Williamson, who's got just an amazing voice, a phenomenal actor. I was very excited to work with him. Catchers is very, very different. Catchers is straight up audio drama, like old school radio plays. And it's about a young woman whose father has recently died, and she's taking a job as a dog catcher to kind of cover the bills. And she's taking over for a guy who's leaving. And so they have we were going for kind of a relationship dynamic like Repo Man, Harry Dean Stanton, and Emilio Estevez. They bicker with each other. They don't get along. He's kind of a crusty old Gen Xer. She's kind of an idealistic Gen Zer. And they're called out to a remote farm to deal with what they think is a coyote or a mountain lion or something that's annoying some farm animals. And it turns out to be a horrible monster, which turns out to be horrible, like a pack of horrible monsters and then some. And basically it's these two ill-equipped, bickering, not friendly people who are, kind of thrust into this situation where they have to get over their differences and the differences of all the people that they come across and kind of save the day. And it stars Billy Gardell, who, if you're a sitcom fan, he's Bob on Bob Hart's Abishola, and he was Mike on Mike and Molly. And Horizon Guardiola, Horizon was on the was on the Baz Luhrmann TV series, The Get Down, which was on Netflix. And she was also one of the leads on another Netflix series called Dare Me, which was about killer cheerleaders. And also she kind of grabbed my attention because she was one of the leads on a Stephen King audio adaptation called Strawberry Spring that I thought was excellent. And she just has, she's got a power and a fragility in her voice, and she's in real life, she's a singer and stuff like that. Although Bob and I learned she went to veterinary school after we cast her, after she agreed to do it. We found out she had studied to be a vet. She had done surgery on a dog.
Oh, well, that must have saved you a little bit on research notes then.
It sure did.
A couple of scenes. I mean, that's brilliant. I must say it's kind of much in the same way as Repo Man. They've kind of, you've got the kind of slight disrespect, old hand versus new person, but they've both got their kind of respect for the job, so to speak, just from slightly different perspectives.
Yeah. And we got, like, honestly, we lucked out with the supporting cast. When you're doing audio, sometimes you could just, because it's not a huge time commitment for actors. So we were able to get like Marilyn Reichskub to come in for a little while. And she plays a character named Dr. Carter. We got David Patrick Kelly, who's like one of my all-time favorite character actors. He was in The Warriors. He was in The Crow. He was on Twin Peaks. He's just an amazing actor. We got him to kind of play the kind of sort of racist old uncle. And a buddy of mine who I went to high school with, Keith Hudson, plays one of the farmers at the farm that they show up at. It was and actually Bonita Friederichi, who was in the feature I directed, Alien Raiders. She was in Video Palace. She's like now in everything I do. She plays kind of a crotchety owner of a bar. It was I think we assembled a really good cast. They work well together, and we were able, like I said, to get them to work with each other. Nikki Michaud plays an investigator who's talking to the Horizon's character Blair the day after everything happened. And Nikki's just a phenomenal actor with a huge, rich body of work.
Oh, well, that's it. And you kind of get, as you're finding out about what's happened, you're also kind of slowly finding out what's happened in the present day as well, as you kind of getting back to that. And with it being an Audible podcast, it kind of, in many ways, it's kind of like an audio film, really, because it goes, for each episode, it's like kind of like a chapter by chapter. Whereas for any listeners out there, podcasts being in themselves episodic in nature, you've often got that kind of jarring start and end in between each episode, which kind of brings you back in. But with Catchers, I know from personal experience, you'll sit there and start listening, and before you know it, you're kind of like 4 or 5 chapters in before you realize, oh, hang on, I've been sitting here for almost 2 hours listening. So It's really good, and I must applaud you on the work, because
Thanks.
I found it very very enthralling. I was very much caught up in the well, I was going to say mystery, but I think the mystery is more in regards to identifying what they are rather than the potential terror. I think we kind of get that very early doors that there's something out there that shouldn't be, and we need to get away from it, so to speak. But yes, one other thing which it would be remiss of me not to mention is, of course, the Blair Witch Project, where obviously you worked on there, and you were friends, if I'm not mistaken, kind of went to the same film school as Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez. Is that correct?
Yeah, we all of us who worked on it. So actually, there's a Video Palace connection there too, by the way. Mike Manello, who was one of the co-creators of Video Palace, he was one of the producers on Blair Witch. And I went to school we all went to school together. We went to the University of Central Florida. Their film program was kind of new. In fact, I think Ed and Dan were in the first year of the new program. I was in the third year. Rob Cowie, who was one of the other producers on Blair Witch, he was in the second year. But Greg Hale, who was like the boots on the ground producer who was there in Maryland with us while we were making it, he and I were in the same class at UCF. And Blair Witch is such a crazy thing, because we all had recently, in the last 4 years had graduated from school. I think I graduated in 95. So we were making it 2 years after I graduated from college. And, we had some experience. I'd been a makeup artist and a special effects makeup artist on some movies in the Southeast United States for a director named David Pryor. And well, for other people too, but I worked on Bloodsport too. I worked on a bunch of stuff as a makeup artist. So everyone had, like, Greg had come out here actually and was an art department person, and Dan was a DP, and everybody had been kind of trying to work and do our thing. And Ed and Dan had that concept in college. I didn't know about it till after college, but they'd been kicking that idea around for a long time. And it was sort of like, hey, let's try this crazy ass idea. And I could not have been more excited to work on that. I was just excited about the idea, about how they wanted to make it, about all the mythology and stuff behind it. So they kind of had me build up a lot of the mythology that became like the pitch tape that ended up being part of the TV series Split Screen, which was, I mean, they don't hide this, but Split Screen on IFC basically paid them for 2 segments. That was like $7,000 a piece of $14,000 of the $25,000 budget that they had, or what it was 25 or 30. Yeah. But it, like 14 of that just came from it being on Split Screen. So I had written sort of a pitch tape, which you can find online. It's overwritten and it's too long. My bad. But it did the job. And they kind of kept me on to do the Curse of the Blair Witch, the TV show that kind of promoted the movie before it came out in theaters. Mm-hmm. I wrote it. Mike Manello produced that. Like, we're all old friends. Like, we're still all in touch.
No, well, that's one of the things I was going to say, because obviously you kind of credited as a production designer on Blair Witch, but from my understanding, and thanks to a brilliant piece that you did with Dread Central a few years back, which I went through.
Oh, thanks.
Man, just like a full detailed kind of step-by-step as to what's happened during the production of the film. But with that, you kind of were pretty much quite instrumental in quite a few aspects. I mean, obviously, as you mentioned, there's the whole kind of the background lore of Blair Witch, whereas, if I'm not mistaken, they kind of had a general idea about what the film was going to be about, and then kind of tasked you with, right, now make sure all the kind of background story aspect of it kind of
the mythology and, like the initial pitch that I was given by Greg Hale, by the way, was kind of a rough sketch of the mythology. Like, it was there, it was all there. Like, I didn't come up with the idea for any of it, but they needed someone to kind of name characters, and what they wanted was to make like a pitch tape. So I had to kind of flesh a lot of it out. Like Ellie Kedward, who is the Blair Witch, is a spoonerism of Edward Kelly, who was actually a British occultist who had worked, I believe, for the king in the Middle Ages. Rustin Parr started as an anagram for Rasputin. I was not being very subtle, but and some of it got changed around and shifted. But yeah, I had put all that together for them. And when we were making the movie, there were like 6 of us doing everything. And after the movie came out, I was reached out to to possibly production design other stuff. And I had to tell people, like, I'm not a production designer. I've production designed exactly one thing in my entire life. And I'd been like an art department PA on, TV commercials and movies of the week and stuff like that. But that does not a production designer make. A real production designer is not me. Like while we were there, my main job was what you would see. So like creating the stick men and stuff like that. Like that was, I had to come up with, they had an idea for what they wanted the stick men to be. And Dan had like done it in it wasn't Adobe Illustrator, but he'd done it in some kind of fancy computer program. And I looked at it, I'm like, I would need a production line to make this. I would need a crew. Yeah. It's me and one other guy, like, and so, partly out of necessity, I came up with the idea for the one that we did. And you can find footage of like, me making the first one I ever made, which is basically the design that ended up being it, and showing it to Ed, and he does not like it. And I'm like crestfallen. But like an idiot, I was like, well, just going to keep doing this. Like a real production designer would have like come back with, 20 options. I don't know what's going on with my webcam. Sorry about that.
Oh, don't worry about that. That's okay. The benefit of radio is it'll just be the audio that we'll put out.
Yeah, it usually doesn't freeze up like that. Anyway, I just kind of stuck with my plan and made the one that I made. And I thought they hated it until it got into Sundance, and they made the Sundance poster and they put the stick man on the poster. I'm like, oh shit, you guys actually liked it. I thought you hated it. But yeah, I mean, it opened because I had done that. They had me do Curse of the Blair. They had me write, Curse of the Blair Witch, which was on Sci-Fi, and that actually got really good ratings for Sci-Fi. And so when the sequel was about to happen, Sci-Fi wanted another special, and then a few months before that, Blair Witch was going to be premiering on Showtime, and Showtime wanted a special too. And that was the first time I ever got hired to direct anything, was for a TV special for the Showtime show. It's called the Burkittsville 7. And to this day, possibly the weirdest thing I've ever convinced anyone to let me make and pay for without me paying for it. And then right on the heels of that, I did a TV special called Shadow of the Blair Witch, which was for Book of Shadows. And it was a special that attempted to do for Book of Shadows what Curse of the Blair Witch did for the Blair Witch Project, but I think Book of Shadows was semi-doomed.
A bit of a different animal, wasn't it?
Well, what they wanted me to do, I had a different idea in mind that they had already paid me to write, and then they saw a cut of the movie and hated it, the executives at Artisan, and they went into damage control around all of the marketing, and my special was one piece of that marketing. And they kind of came to me and said, we want you to do basically a Joe Berlinger style true crime documentary about the real crimes that the movie is reenacting. And I'm like, really? So what you're saying is last year, a bunch of people were murdered in cold blood, and not even a year later, you're releasing an entertaining horror movie based on that. Like, that seems nuts. But to their credit, they actually let me put in a bit that I pitched them, which was like, what if family members were trying to sue to prevent the movie from being released because it was, trivializing the death of their, I mean, it's all made up and fake anyway. But like, I think that I get stuck in this verisimilitude loop in my head about like, okay, like what would really happen? How, like, what are the steps between this? Where would everything be sourced? It was something Bob and I were really rigorous about on Video Palace. Was like every scrap of audio had to be something that Mark either recorded himself or found.
Yeah.
And finding archival audio, even on the internet, can sometimes be hard, but it also opened us up to like, oh, an old answering machine message. That sounds great. Like there's, you could kind of play that game, and it made it more interesting. But with with Curse of the Blair Witch, Burkittsville 7, and Shadow, like we were I kind of either figured out or created ways to do the stuff that I later did in Video Palace. I've done other projects that were done kind of in a similar style.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously all the additional things that you did with the Blair Witch are superb, but especially personally, I'm a big fan of the Burkittsville 7.
Oh, thanks.
Just the whole kind of structure of that, and especially how you were able to, some of the older kind of archive footage, which, I mean, presumably it was all filmed about the same time, and then you just kind of, you know, monkeyed about with the film stock, or how it was.
I mean, we shot it on film, and so like all the stuff in the prison was shot on black and white 16 millimeter. That whole because we made that in 2000, so everything was done. Today you would probably do it digitally and figure out ways, you know, with LUTs and whatnot to make it look archival. And we didn't do that. We shot 100% of that on film. The only piece that I didn't make was the interview with Rustin Parr, which was made for Curse of the Blair Witch. So Ed and Dan actually directed that down in Florida, you know, a couple of years earlier. But all the stuff in the mental institution. So there's for those who haven't heard it or haven't seen it, there's like a film within a film that's that is heavily inspired by a real documentary called Titicut Follies by a brilliant documentarian named Frederick Wiseman. And our fake documentary is called White Enamel. And it's about, a prison for the criminally insane, excuse me. And Kyle Brody, who was the kid who got away from Rustin Parr as an adult, is an inmate in this prison, and the main character in the Burkittsville 7 stumbles across this and is like trying to find clues about Kyle Brody within that. And we shot that at Camarillo State, which was a mental hospital that had closed some years before we shot there. It's now, I think, a college campus. But it was basically an empty mental hospital. Looked shockingly like Titicut Follies. Like, it was very easy to dress it up. I mean, we had a great production designer on that, a guy named Steve Ducher, but it was I don't know, it was crazy putting that together, because you're in a real mental institution, and the place was just super creepy to shoot in. And and we shot it on 16 millimeter, and the DP from the Blair Witch Project, Neil Fredericks, DP'd that.
Yeah, well, I'm going to say one of my favorite films outside of a few of us is Session 9, and I think that's one of the things about that movie is the location is possibly one of the main stars of the entire production, and I think that's been turned into some sort of high rent flats now,
probably,
which is something along those lines. It's definitely been. It's not what it once was. I can certainly guarantee that.
Super creepy though. That movie is amazing, and I feel it's something I return to a bit. I've seen that movie a few times. I saw that when its initial run in the theater. First movie ever shot on HD that got released, theatrical release. It beat Star Wars by a few months.
Yeah, and one of the things I always find fascinating about it, even though I think it's quite hard to find, obviously, with everything being streaming, is that they were almost going to go a completely different direction to make it quite a generally generic horror film, where there was going to be, somebody within the asylum causing a lot of the issues and returning patients coming back in. But at the last minute, they just decided just to scrap that entire subplot and kind of gave us the film that it was, which in some ways leaves it slightly open-ended as to how you want to interpret it. And the other version would have been 100%, oh, this is what happened. And I think with that, it would have quite easily fallen in with a lot of movies of that time and just disappeared. But I think now it's possibly, recognized more now than it's ever been, really, in its like 20 odd years since it came out. But obviously, enough about other people's work. For the Blair Witch specifically, I mean, it was very much a big movie in my life, because it as it was released, I was studying. It was media at the time, and at college, and we all went on a field trip to see it. And I think, to be honest, at the time, I think we were probably about I don't know, we would have been just old enough to watch it. But one of the biggest aspects of the reason behind we went to go and see it was in regards to the marketing campaign for the movie, the viral marketing campaign, which, if I'm not mistaken, the Blair Witch was potentially I think literally the first movie to really use the internet in the way that it did. Were you kind of in any way involved in any of that, other than obviously the documentaries and some of the lore?
Well, I mean, a lot of the content that went up on that site was stuff I had created or written, because there was like a detailed timeline. So again, I can't take full credit for the entire backstory, but I had that had been the first task that they'd kind of assigned to me, was kind of naming all the characters and pulling all those images. And some of the images were images I took pictures of, like there's a picture of the book, The Blair Witch Cult, which is a picture I took. I literally went into a history museum in Orlando and convinced them to let me put it under glass and take a few pictures of it. So I had created some of the content, but I think the main credit for even doing that goes to a combo of Ed Sanchez and Mike Manello. I think it was Mike's idea, because what had happened was Split Screen, the TV show on IFC that had first featured Blair Witch, they had a website. The internet was kind of a new fancy thing back then. So they had a website, and it like melted down their page. Like it was getting hung up because so many people were commenting on it. So I guess John Pearson reached out to Mike Manello and said, you guys should just get these people away from me. Like, you should set up a website and let them come over and talk over there. So they used some kind of primitive web builder program. This is 1998. They used it was 97, because the show went on before we filmed it. And we filmed in October of 97. So they kind of just threw that thing up, and it was, became kind of a chat board. And then like almost not by accident, but like people who were on the internet started finding it, and it kind of blew it up. Like the numbers were just insane. So, I don't believe any other movie before then had used that as a tool, but I also feel like, Mike Manello is kind of a visionary to this day, in terms of like how to use technology in ways people hadn't thought about before. And, but also like, I don't know that, anyone was taking it that seriously. I don't know that anyone was taking it that seriously at the beginning of that process, because it was, at the time, the internet was kind of in 1997, it was kind of a marginal thing that some people were into, but not everybody. Not like now.
So it was always kind of like a happy accident. You thought, oh, well, we'll kind of use the internet to promote the film, see what happens. And then it became the whole kind of legend that furthered the whole kind of mystery of is it a real film, or is it fictional? Yeah, I mean, I remember specifically the website itself. I remember going on that website and just, I suppose looking back on it now, you kind of think how kind of bare bones it was, but it was genuine to like a kind of a website that somebody would have put up at the time, especially something like somebody trying to source information. Have you seen these people? That sort of thing.
Yeah, every website was bare bones back then. Nobody knew that the internet was going to become what it became.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know there is probably still some version of it, although I think the original website is no longer on its original at the same address, because it was just like blairwitch.com, wasn't it? But I think no doubt somebody much more technically minded than I would be able to search it out on the internet.
I think if you go to Haxan.com, if I'm not mistaken, Haxan Films is the production company that made the Blair Witch Project. I think if you go there, they have an archived version of the website as Artisan presented it, because Artisan kind of retooled it, but they didn't change it that much. They sexied it up a little bit. And actually, a guy named Dan Karcher, who is, a good friend to all of us who worked on the film, was the designer of that. We got to know him after that. I don't know if the other guys knew him. I didn't know him before that, but he's like kind of he's the archivist to this day of all the stuff that we did.
Oh yeah, and obviously went on to strength for strength. I know from reading the kind of blog entries that you did for Dread Central a few years back, you hadn't seen the the remake. You were aware of the remake coming out.
Oh, I hadn't seen it when I wrote that because it hadn't come out yet, but I saw it opening night.
Yeah. So what were your thoughts on that? I mean, to be honest with you, until I was actually rereading your thing, I'd almost forgotten that they had remade it. I don't know whether that's a criticism or what. What were your thoughts on the remake?
Well, I mean, Adam Wingard, you couldn't make a better filmmaker in a laboratory to make a new Blair Witch movie than Adam. And Simon Barrett, his writer, those guys are very smart in the genre. They're very respectful of the source material. I know none of the behind the scenes information about it. It's kind of funny. They had fully made the movie, and a filmmaker friend of mine who knew them said, "Hey, they made a new Blair Witch movie." And I'm like, "They did what?" And it was the first, installment of anything Blair Witch that no one had even asked my opinion about. I hadn't consulted or been involved. And it's not that nobody has an obligation to reach out to me. So, I kind of went to see it with very fresh eyes. Overall, I liked it. I thought it was cool. I thought that they kind of did what sort of needed to happen, which was almost a reboot of the idea, even though it's acknowledging the original. It's kind of updating it and kind of I knew that they were going to take liberties with the mythology that I'd helped create, and I can be kind of precious about that stuff. And I was really pleased that they had changed it and added stuff, but it wasn't, they hadn't turned it upside down. They kind of kept it, in one piece. And overall, I liked the film that they made. I feel like, I don't know, it's a tough nut to crack to me to make a new Blair Witch movie that would resonate with audiences, because it's a brand that is known, like fans of the genre, and even just probably like everyday people. If you say Blair Witch, they are aware that it exists or they've seen it or something. But really, since the first one, there hasn't been like a blow the doors off kind of thing. And I maintain to this day, I don't know how it could happen, but Ed and Dan had an idea for a prequel that would have been like the origin story of it. So it'd be like a colonial era, like it would have been a lot like The Witch, that movie, The Witch. Their idea was in that vein. I would rather see that than another found footage movie, because I feel like the found footage approach, even though I think the approach that they took on the Adam Wingard film was good, I just don't know that I think that people get tired of the gimmick of it. And I wasn't in the room, but I feel like that was a studio level decision. Like, it's got to be found footage. And, you can find a way into the story that's not found footage. I mean, the Paranormal Activity movies proved also you can take found footage and keep going. So, I mean, I enjoyed it. I was bummed out it didn't do better. I was the reason I even wrote those blogs for Dread Central is because it was coming out. It had been announced, and Steve Barton, who at the time was the publisher of Dread Central, asked me if I would like to write something about it. And no one had ever asked me my version of the story, because I'm not the writer, I'm not the director. So, I get it. But I was glad, because I kind of had a very good front row seat of what happened during the making of and the aftermath and all that stuff, and sort of the backlash. The movie got a lot of backlash. It was 2016 was weird when that movie came out, for me, in a good way, because suddenly people came out of the woodwork talking about how much they loved the movie, and I kind of thought everyone hated it. I thought it had been a weird craze that fidget spinners that everyone was sick of. And people were, and I was, kind of moved to realize that, we had made something that actually had some teeth to it, some staying power, because that's, as a filmmaker, even though I didn't write or direct the movie, it was very close to me. And as a filmmaker, what you want is to do something that impacts an audience and sticks around. It's nice to get paid to make the stuff, but to make something that you really care about and that it really resonates even years after that's kind of bonkers, that 10 years later, 20 years later, people still discovered it.
No, I mean it's great. I mean, obviously it was perfect for my age group. It was kind of like the I don't know, epoch type of film for us, and you know, in many ways, I think even though obviously Blair Witch wasn't the first found footage, so to speak, you can just look at all the found footage movies that came out post Blair Witch, and I think you can very much kind of not blame Blair Witch, because some of them aren't necessarily brilliant, but you can definitely kind of make the assumption that without Blair Witch, the majority of those movies probably wouldn't have came about, because it kind of gives people the understanding and the impression that, especially with any genre, but specifically horror, as long as you've got a good idea and you've got some rudimentary equipment or brilliant equipment, whatever it would be, you can just basically get off there and get going and do it, and the results will pay dividends as they did in the instance of the Blair Witch. And I know you mentioned in the blog kind of thing that you did for Dread Central about the comic books and some of the extra things, and there's even a Blair Witch bear made in Japan.
The missing bear. It's called the missing bear. I have a few of them. It's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. It was like when they showed me that in a marketing meeting, I burst out laughing, and they were all like, "What? This is great!" And I'm like, "All right, it's a fucking teddy bear with a stick man on its face."
Maybe there's bounds for animation there. You could do an entire Blair Witch with teddy bears and just have paw prints on the wall and things like that instead. It would be an interesting one. But yeah, I mean, I collected the comic because I think we had because there was the comic, and I think a lot of this creative team were similar to the one working on the X-Files comic at the same time. So there was a bit of a crossover with some of the artists. I don't know about the writers specifically. I don't know how that would work out, but all very good. And if you've got a few copies of them somewhere, I'm sure they're worth a pretty penny these days.
I even have a weird Japanese comic book version of Burkittsville 7 that got made. That's bonkers. Yeah, I'd forgotten completely about it. I was going through an old box about a year and a half ago, and I was like, what the hell? I'd completely forgotten that it existed. They made so many interesting things, and a lot of them were like marketing projects. So we might, I mean, again, like the main guys from Haxan, Rob Cowie or Greg Hale or Ed or Dan might have been in on some of those meetings, but like the missing bear was like, that was definitely above our pay grades, all of us. Like, at the time they were saying Japanese liked at that time, this is 2000, to combine cuddly imagery with creepy imagery. So that's where they came up with the missing bear. And it's a soft little fluffy teddy bear that's got a stick man on its snout. It's so weird.
It is. I've seen some of the pictures of it, and it's got to be seen to be believed. And I will send out some links up, obviously, to the blog that you did, as well as some other things that we've talked about. But before I leave you, I do want to ask you about I Hear Fear, another kind of podcast production. Now, if I'm not mistaken, did you just write one of the episodes?
Yeah. Bob DeRosa and I co-wrote. Sorry, that's my dog. Bob DeRosa and I co-wrote an episode called "Trust the Process" about. They were still trying to get Carey Mulligan on board, so we knew that Carey Mulligan was the target, but we didn't know for sure that it was going to happen. And it was, but the story is like from her life. She hosts the whole show, so she's like the Rod Serling of I Hear Fear. And then we were basically telling a story of like a crazy screwed up experience she had on a movie that went very occult. And I think I don't think you can get it on any podcast source right now, but you can get it on Wondery, and they have their own app.
It's like on Amazon. If you've got like Amazon login, you can access it. So it's not one of these ones that's on all podcast platforms, but I think as most people have some sort of Prime account or something like that
Yeah,
these
yeah.
days, if not just to get the Christmas presents in on a decent time. Then yeah, that's definitely how I sourced it. And I won't lie, I have gone backwards into it. I have started with the Trust the Process. I'll go back through and get the other ones as well. But yeah, so it's interesting and kind of another sign, kind of pointing towards the popularity of podcasts, and I suppose to a degree, lockdowns had and the pandemic has had an effect on that. Whereas we were starting to get some more kind of A-list and celebrity types into the podcast medium now. Well, pretty much everybody's got some sort of podcast or is the face of some sort of podcast, from former prime presidents all the way down, basically.
Yeah, well, and Jordan Peele just did a huge horror podcast for Spotify, which I have not heard yet, but I have been told it is awesome. And I don't have Spotify, and I'm like, I'm gonna have to get Spotify and listen to it. Maybe like get an account while over the Christmas holidays, and then, but I hear it's awesome, and I think it's interesting as more people get into the audio space, because you can afford to be a little experimental in there. It's not as expensive to do it. It's also not as expensive to redo it. So, we didn't have any pickups or retakes on Catchers or Video Palace. But if you had an idea and you wanted to write something up and, get some actors and record it, it's not a big, it goes fast. You don't have to, actor time is not, I don't want to say it's not precious, because it's somebody's time you're asking for, but it's very creative. That you don't have it, in movies and TV. You'll do on a movie, you'll do between maybe 4, maybe 5 pages a day, maybe less. Big movies, maybe 1.5 pages a day. TV, maybe 8 pages a day. And in audio, you're doing 45 to 65 pages a day. So you can just fly through this stuff. Video Palace, we recorded the whole thing in 5 days. Catchers, because of COVID and some other and schedule stuff, like it ended up being more drawn out, but it was actually about the same amount of hours of recording time as Video Palace. It was around 40 something hours. And, we're talking about 2.5 in the case of Catchers, 3 hours in the case of Video Palace of content. It's a lot of stuff that you can get done quickly. And I feel like it's a great way to kind of prototype an idea and kind of kick the tires on it, see if it works. Granted, there's some things that work in audio that aren't going to work in a visual medium, or there's some things that, like, you can have an establishing shot in a visual in a movie or a TV show, and immediately, like we know we're at an auto mechanic, we're in the desert, we're wherever, like, it immediately. And with this, you have to have a device to explain all that, but you can do it. Sometimes you can just do it with sound effects. Sometimes you can do it with a narrator or flashback or, whatever. And I just think it's a lot of fun, which sometimes, making movies and stuff can get to be a logistical headache and a drag. Not saying I don't want to do that stuff still. I'm still working on that kind of stuff. But audio, you can really try a lot of stuff. You can go very fast, and actors love it. You can get, if you have some money, you can get name actors, but also, just getting good actors to do it, like it opens up their imagination. And I feel like we have I feel like there's so many people playing with it now on a not I shouldn't say non-professional, but like the technology, like this microphone in front of me is not an expensive microphone, but you could use it for a podcast. The recording devices that we use, whatever, you can, it's not like you have to go be in a studio with hundreds of thousands of dollars of audio gear. You could get kind of off the shelf gear to record with and use GarageBand or Audacity or Audition or Pro Tools, whatever you wanted. You could get a $200 per year subscription to Artlist or Envato Elements or whatever, and have huge sound effects libraries at your disposal. Also, you could do Foley. And those also have music libraries if you wanted to use library music, or you can work. I always prefer to work with a composer, but also I want to pay a composer. If you're being super thrifty for almost nothing, you could make an idea and see if it worked. And if you
Well,
wanted to
that's
release
it,
it as a
yeah.
podcast, that's also dirt cheap to do.
Yeah, because it's not like prohibitively expensive, and it's almost like kind of like a punk ethos or like a trauma ethos, where it's basically if you've got the idea and you've got the equipment, just do it. You've got
Yes.
nothing holding you back. And if you make a mistake, unlike say like a day's filming, which is going to cost everybody a huge amount of time and more importantly in that world money, you can kind of, like you say, work on something with audio, and if it doesn't necessarily work, you can go, all right, well, we'll just try something different. And you haven't necessarily had to spend, hundreds of thousands or in some cases millions of dollars on an idea that didn't work and putting everybody back. You can just kind of just crack on and keep going with it. One thing I will ask before leaving you, obviously I will be asking you about any upcoming or other work that you're doing. But one question that I do like to ask all the people that I have on Pablo's Vault of Horror is essentially the trifecta, the main bodies within the horror world. You've got your Freddy Krueger, your Jason Voorhees, your Michael Myers, and Leatherface, of course. Can't forget Leatherface. Now, obviously, everybody generally recognises those four, but if you had to remove one from sorry, not remove one. If you were to keep one and get rid of all the others out of those four, your Freddy Krueger, your Michael Myers, your Jason Voorhees, and your Leatherface, which one would you keep, and which three would you cast off to the dustbin of history?
Oh man, I mean it's a tough question, but it's an easy answer for me. I would keep Freddy Krueger for sure, and I think it's because, like, I don't know. I mean, Leatherface is awesome. I think that the first installment of all of those movies are great, but Freddy was the one that was able to come back more and be more surprising because he shows up in your dreams. So every filmmaker who tackled it went at it in a different surrealist way. And even when Wes Craven came back and did Wes Craven's New Nightmare, like, he was able to approach it differently than he approached the original material. But yeah, I mean, of the main slasher, what do you, the Mount
Rushmore of horror,
the Mount Rushmore of horror, yeah. Like, I feel like Freddy Krueger is the one who always had the potential to surprise me and do something different. Like, I mean, I love all of those franchises, but like the first Halloween is, I think, arguably always the best. The original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, holy fuck, just, can't touch it. It's such a perfect film. But later iterations kind of, to me weren't as good. The second one's cool. But, and Tobe Hooper did that one as well. But, like Halloween, maybe I get kicked out of being a horror fan for saying, like, I lose a constant fascination with Michael Myers. Like, the first movie is so great, but after that, like, I just kind of lose the thread sometimes.
Yeah, and I suppose a big part of the Michael Myers thing is that, ironically enough, he is, referred to as the Shape because he's supposed to be basically a like kind of a threatening vacant space in many ways.
Yeah.
And the fact that everybody's so fascinated by him, it seems to be kind of like where you're almost missing the point slightly. But I suppose one of the big aspects with the Mount Rushmore question is Robert Englund, really.
For sure.
All the other three, I know people know Kane Hodder and here, there, and everywhere, but in reality, you could really get anybody to play any of those three roles. But if you were to replace Robert Englund, as they did in one instance, it doesn't really have that same return. And you kind of realize that without the kind of comedy chops in a way of Robert Englund, when they did the remake of Nightmare on Elm Street 100% series, you kind of realize, well, a demonic child killer, not really that.
And Jackie Earle Haley's a fucking amazing actor.
Exactly, one of the best actors out there. But they're kind of focusing on the whole kind of child assault and murder aspect of it, which is obviously something which they they don't shy away from, but they don't kind of like write it out writ large in the movies. But by doing that in the remake, that kind of, I think even the most kind of like open-minded of horror fans kind of went to that and just went, it's missing something. And I think that something was Robert Englund.
I agree. I mean, I just feel like he is that. I do think he's kind of irreplaceable in that role. And, I mean, like maybe he just didn't want to do it. I don't know. But I sort of feel like, when Robert Englund is, 95 years old, he could still play Freddy Krueger, because you're not going to recognize him under all that makeup. It's just a matter of, does he have the energy, stamina, and desire to do it anymore?
Well, that's it. And I heard, if I'm not mistaken, I think, is it Elijah Wood and his production company, even some way? I heard some rumblings about him potentially going forward with some new Nightmare on Elm Street things, and Robert Englund possibly being interested. But as with a lot of these things, I think I read it in an article somewhere which didn't necessarily credit anybody in particular. So it may just be a bit of nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, you never know, but I mean, like, yeah, I mean, like for me also, like I feel like my Mount Rushmore would probably include Bruce Campbell, and I don't know if you could put a director on there, I would put Stuart Gordon. I feel like there are so many talented people who work in that genre, and do such interesting work, and I think that for me, like always, the more surreal Cronenberg kind of stuff was more of a hook for me. I'll go see anything Cronenberg does, but I'm not like 100% in to see every. I say this, I've watched probably every Texas Chainsaw movie ever made, but like I kind of put it on, going like, maybe it'll be good. I don't know, like what surprises are left in this. I feel like that first one to this day is horrifying, creepy, scary, like it, and it was old news by the time I was old enough to watch it. It's the same with like the Romero Living Dead movies, and partway through watching The Walking Dead, I kind of stopped. I just kind of lost it, and I'm like, it's not that they're not doing cool work or interesting stuff. It just felt like, how much of this do I need to watch? Like, I get it. I super get it.
Oh no, definitely. And I think with in the whole remakes thing, with Evil Dead, for example, the Fede Alvarez's version remake of Evil Dead, I personally love, because one of the things.
Me too.
Yeah, one of the things that probably worked better for that, weirdly, than the Nightmare on Elm Street remake is, even though the comedy was kind of part of Nightmare on Elm Street, it wasn't kind of intentionally right up there in front. Whereas obviously with your kind of Evil Dead and the like, that was kind of more what Sam Raimi was wanting to put in there. That's kind of like his thing. But Fede Alvarez doing the Evil Dead like without the humor, with the humor kind of surgically removed, and leaving it for the kind of horrific concept that it is, to my mind, I think, in some ways people kind of slept on that one unnecessarily. And I think if a lot of people went back to Fede Alvarez's version, they'll be kind of surprised about how brilliant a film that is.
I loved it. And I have often said that, to me, like, the one horror franchise that has zero duds, is Evil Dead. Every entry of it, so the original movie Evil Dead 2 is one of my all-time favorite movies, period. Army of Darkness, the remake, the TV series Ash versus Evil Dead, like every piece of it I've eaten up, and they've got the new one coming out, and I will definitely be first online to see it. I've never watched an Evil Dead thing and been like, I've loved them all, including Fede Alvarez's one. I thought, it's like, sure, reinvent it. Like, it doesn't have to be the thing I liked when I was 16. It can be, there is some genuinely creepy stuff in this world, and I thought he really did a great job with it. I mean, I think that sure hands have been on that material every single time, and it's something that's willing to kind of go out there. Like, Army of Darkness is about as way out as a horror franchise has ever gone. And it's a comfort movie for me. If
I would say that kind of came out at just the right time for me. That one as well. That was kind of like my early to mid teenage years, and that was definitely I think for sleepover birthday parties, I think that was in regular rotation for quite some time. whether my friends wanted to or not, but they were made to watch it. Now, obviously, thank you very much for your time, Ben.
Of course.
There anything else that you're working on or upcoming that you're happy to talk about?
I can't. The stuff I have upcoming, I can't really talk about at the moment, unfortunately, because it's not. It might not happen. Who knows? It's the. Yeah, I have some stuff in process right now that I'm hoping will be a new movie that I'll be working on, but I can't. Beyond that, I don't really want to say much because I'll look like an idiot if it doesn't happen. I will say that, we didn't really talk about it, but anyone listening to this who's interested, go to check out. I did a web series a few years ago called 20 Seconds to Live, which I did also with Bob DeRosa as the first. Bob and I had done tons of work together in theater, but it was the first film TV kind of thing we had done together. And we co-created it. I directed all of them. He wrote all of them. And it was a cool experience. We got a bunch of horror people are in that, like Derek Mears is in it. Adam Green is in one. Tom Holland, director of Fright Night and Child's Play, is in one of them. That was a lot of fun. What else? Well, you can sort of see my poster, although your listeners can't see anything. I had a movie that came out a long time ago called Alien Raiders. You can check that out too. But anything you want to see of my work, you can check out at benrock.com. I have my reels and stuff over there.
Oh, superb. And obviously Blair Witch Project, I'm sure you'll be able to find that. A lot of the Burkittsville 7 and Shadow of the Blair Witch, I believe they're both on YouTube. If there's not
they're both on my personal Vimeo too.
Yes.
I was actually kind of upset that they never included them in any of the DVD or Blu-ray releases of Blair Witch stuff. And eventually I was like, well, if they're not going to put it out there, I'll just stick it up on Vimeo. I mean,
it's the same, because I think the entire thing with the Blair Witch is the kind of the lore and the whole kind of that somebody dug up this bit of research in it. It really bolsters the film so much that I don't know why they wouldn't want to put it in there.
They released Burkittsville 7 and Shadow of the Blair Witch on a VHS tape called The Massacre of the Burkittsville 7. And that's the only time that Artisan released it, and then a few years later Artisan went out of business and Lionsgate took over, and I just don't even know if anyone at Lionsgate knows or cares that they own these properties. So it never got put out, and it is what it is. I just stuck them up on my Vimeo just because I was proud of the work, and I feel like it's one of those things where it's it was done under a SAG contract, so somebody could. If anyone, I kind of put them up thinking well, if someone says cease and desist, I'll make the links private and let people watch them with a password or something. But nobody's ever said anything about it, and it's because the studios, whole movies are up on YouTube. They don't care. So
no, well, that's it. And in some ways, I think they kind of like to keep an eye on those numbers for any potential remakes, or kind of there's been a big pickup in this. Maybe we'll do a bit of research on the other. I mean, that's pretty much how Deadpool got made, wasn't it? It was, it got
leaked. They made a demo and it got leaked.
And as a proof of concept, and then from there it all kind of snowballed. So who knows? Little tip to any of you filmmakers out there who aren't getting any traction. That might be a to go. Just put it all out for free and
get Ryan Reynolds to be in your thing, and then leak it.
Well, that's it. Well, he's just down the road these days, down in Wales. So, he's there quite often. Now, and Catchers, that's on Audible. So you do need an Audible subscription for that. But
you can very easily get a free 30-day trial. And if you don't feel like paying for it, they're just go to their website and they'll give you a 30-day free trial. You can listen to our thing, then cancel your trial. Or
and I will say
please leave comments first, then cancel your trial.
But I will say for Audible as well, one of the things that they are one of the best for, if you want to take a break or put a snooze on it, or even if you kind of completely unsubscribe from Audible, anything that you've got is still on your Audible profile, so you can still go back and listen to
Audible's an awesome service. I was an Audible subscriber before I worked on this. I sometimes feel like I'm shilling for these companies. I was a huge Shudder fan before we did Video Palace. I'd been subscribing to Shudder for years, and honestly had been trying to get a meeting with Shudder. I wanted to go there and pitch them ideas, and then out of left field, this project dropped in my lap that was for Shudder. But yeah, Audible's an awesome service. But I on the one hand, like people are used to getting audio for free. And so I feel bad asking people to go out and pay money on Audible, even though I think it's a valuable service to me and I like it. But yeah, go get a free trial. It's pretty easy.
Yeah, and obviously you've got Video Palace, which I think is just via, originally was a Shudder exclusive, but I think now is available on any podcast portal.
Oh yeah, it's everywhere. The only thing that isn't, and they should just put it out. Maybe I'll see if I'll see if there's a way that we can do this. But we had done a bunch of bonus episodes, which were extended interviews. So like we interviewed Adam Green, and we interviewed Steve Barton and Sam Zimmerman and Brian Collins and Eric Spudik, and they on their, like when I was, because I edited a lot of those for Video Palace anyway, so I would edit the interviews and then find the 2 minutes that ended up being in the show. But like Adam, especially Adam Green, Steve Barton too, these guys would just I encouraged them to elaborate. So the interviews were handled like real interviews. They were given a bio. This is something I started doing on Curse of the Blair Witch. They're given a bio with all the bullet points that they needed to hit. But I was like, make new stuff up. It doesn't matter. Like go crazy. And so when we interview them, it's really like a 20-30 minute interview that we do with them. And then we cut it down. So it's scripted in that we've told them what information to give us, but we haven't told them how to say it. And so Adam, man, Adam Green is a wonderful guy. And he just went off and elaborated and came up with this awesome backstory that was way beyond anything I had done. And when I was cutting it, I was like, God, I feel shitty that you're only going to get 2 minutes of this, because really Adam's story is great. And so I pitched them like, hey, would you guys like bonus episodes? And they were like, yeah, sure. So we have the extended interviews with all of those people. Again, Steve Barton too. Steve is, one of the most entertaining people I've ever spoken to in my life. And he added so much, and he was so much fun with it. And so, we kind of put those are the only things that are Shudder exclusive. Everything else, even back in the day, they released it all on Shudder all at once, and then they put out 2 episodes a week. So it was only, there's only 10 episodes, so 5 weeks, and it was all out anyway. And wherever you get podcasts, it's everywhere.
Yeah, you'd think there'd be whatever statute of limitations they were hoping for might have ended by now, so they can get it out there. But
especially now, like as we're talking, last week there was kind of a bloodbath at Shudder. Like the CEO left, many of the executives left, and AMC Networks, who owns Shudder, is kind of consolidating a lot of stuff. Yeah, and so they're. I mean, I hope we have Shudder for a long time. There probably won't be as many Shudder originals, if any, moving forward, or at least not for a minute. So I'm a little scared about that stuff. But at the same time, I feel like they could just I might reach out to Mike Manello and say like, hey, why don't they just put all the bonus episodes out on the podcast feed? It'll just keep the feed alive a little bit. They'd be into it. Mike got a book called Video Palace: In Search of the Eyeless Man, published a couple of years ago during the pandemic, actually. And it's like a book of short stories that kind of very, very, very loosely tie into the podcast. And they made an audio book out of it, which is on Audible. So they've released, I think, a couple of those stories on that podcast feed as well, to kind of get people to check out the book.
Oh, I think I missed that one. I'll check that one out. Well, anyway, thank you very much, Ben. You can find Ben on Twitter at Neptune Salad, spelt as it's said. So Neptune like the Poseidon knockoff, and salad like the boring meal. Well, no offense to any vegetarians out there.
Neptune salad's loaded with seafood, so vegetarians won't be offended.
Oh, well, there you go. You go. That's it. But yes, thank you very much for your time. And by all means, anybody listening to this who's unfamiliar with Ben's work, by all means, get yourself out there and subscribe and download and whatever you need to do to get yourself familiar. So thank you very much, Ben. And I'll pass back over to Pablo in the studio. Over to you, Pablo.